Hello and welcome. You're watching CNBC Africa, and this are the highlights of the Africa Development Week 2017 on its fourth day today. And on this final day, we put a spotlight on youth unemployment as we speak to the Acting Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Abdalla Hamdok.
The theme of this conference is on growth, inequality and unemployment. These are extremely important issues for the continent development, in the sense that if you do not address unemployment and inequality, you risk having a number of impediments like inequality fuel instability, both economic and political, but also the unemployment has that potential. You've seen the upheavals and the uprising and all the stability that came with this. The issue is Africa for the last decade and a half had very impressive growth rates, 5% on average. Some of our countries are growing at double digits, but this growth has very little impact on both inequality, poverty, and also unemployment. In fact, in some places it has fueled inequality. In that sense, we would like to look at the opportunities of having that type of growth which will have an impact on unemployment. And this can only happen if we create what we could call the opportunities for decent jobs. And this can only come in the industrial sector and the manufacturing and the higher end of the service sector. Up to now, we did not manage to get to that. Our manufacturing sector has very little contribution today. In fact, we went through a process in the last maybe few decades of what you could call the deindustrialization of this continent. So in that sense, we should be able to reverse that by looking at manufacturing, bringing industrialization firm in the agenda of the continent. So that is how I see this process.
Let's address the youth numbers for a moment, because we look at them as a population surge, and everybody has been talking about time to reap the demographic dividend. But there's very little in investment that has been done towards that direction. What would you propose as low-hanging fruits for African governments to reap this dividend?
You know, this demographic dividend is, of course, extremely important if we harness it and if we worked on it in a much more structured fashion. By way of looking at it, it can be an opportunity, but at the same time, it could be also a threat, a ticking bomb. So the way to harness it is to go through a process of human development, skill development. This is a huge resource. Countries that harness their demographic dividend well, if we go by the Asian experience, actually 40% of the Asian miracle attributed to the way they benefited from demographic dividend. Their demographic dividend has taken place in a span of 5 to 15 years, the shortest experience in the entire world. We need to emulate that, or at least benefit from that experience, by providing skills for our young people, by also embarking on a serious process of judicious planning and development that would allow the creation of jobs, which will be through industrialization, through value addition, through all that, but also getting the right type of skill mix and all this. If this is, and the window is very short, if we could not catch that, then if it slips away, it could transform this whole promise into a catastrophic situation whereby you will have the current situation of young people either migrating, taking this ugly journey somewhere in the world, but also fueling tension, fueling rebellion, fueling civil wars and all this.
Right. My final point then would be, how then do we encourage African governments to invest in these structural reforms, especially in education, in areas like TVET and in specifically for STEM?
Well, I guess the first point is for the African government themselves to recognize that this is an extremely important area, that if, and I believe you are serious about it, in addressing our development, we should begin to think that no nation in the world has developed without addressing seriously the issue of human capital development. And that can only happen if we start a very serious process of planning, of linking the education sector, our universities and all that, to the job market, linking it to the private sector, and have a very serious process of that brings all these sectors together.
Country profiles have been stated as the best diagnostic tools in the structural transformation for Africa. We get to catch up with Giovanie Biha, who is Executive Secretary for Knowledge Delivery at the Economic Commission for Africa.
There were 21 country profiles that were launched yesterday. It was a very good event, as you have witnessed it in terms of attendance, but also in terms of the discussions and the issues that are covered in these 21 country profiles. You know that the ECA is a continental organization, but we also have 5 offices that cover 5 main regions of the continent. So the work that we do mainly, especially on economic development, economic and social development, are both continental in nature, but also regional. So with these new, I would say relatively new products that are country profiles, they allow us to build a bridge between the work that we do at the continental level, at the sub-regional level, and then at the country level. So it gives us the opportunity to dive on economic and social issues, but more importantly, the focus of that analysis is around economic and social transformation. Right. So they are a diagnostic tool, but at the same time, it's a vehicle for ECA to engage with member states, but also with key stakeholders at the national level. We engage member states on critical issues of economic development, but more importantly, economic issues that really drive structural transformation. Right. And we have a special focus on those country profiles that are quite different from some other organizations. So I would like just to highlight a few of them. Sure. And I would highlight about 4 specific features of the country profiles. And the first one is the sources of data and the statistics that we use for all indicators that we have in the country profiles. We actually make sure that the sources are national sources. This is very important for 2 things. One is the opportunity to work with national statistical institutions and other entities that produce data that are critical for economic and social development, but to engage them and be able to see the gaps and work with those institutions and other organizations to address the gaps. They could be institutional, they could be system gaps, they could be infrastructure. The second important element for using national data is also the opportunity for countries and government themselves to really own the narrative that is developed in the country profile. So this is very important. It's to own the narrative, but also, as you know, good data is also important for decision making. Very quickly, the second important feature is, as you know, ECA has really worked very closely with the African Union Commission, but also with the African Development Bank on issues of continental integration. And we are really championing with our key partner, the African Union Commission the issue of continental integration and regional integration. And through the country profiles is also the opportunity to engage the government on their commitment on regional and continental integration and assess the extent to which they are meeting their commitments.
All right. Let's just revisit a bit about meeting the data gaps that we do have in Africa. And there seems to be a culture where we either do not have the data or we're not willing to use them, and especially on the policy formulation stage. How do we encourage African governments to have more data-based decision-making systems?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question and comment, but I would like to correct one thing. I don't think that there is a culture as such that our policymakers and policy leaders that they do not want to use data. I think for a very long period of time, I would say that in a number of countries, the national statistical institutions were not really equipped to collect data, analyze data, produce data in the form of statistics that are viable and usable. So I think that there is a revival of long-term planning, but also with the revival of planning, data is really essential, because you can't talk about medium or long-term planning if you don't have the right data in order to make, as you say, the right decisions.
And that wraps up the conversation right here at the Africa Development Week 2017 in Dakar, Senegal. My name is Bonnie Tunya.